Hello guys, welcome back to Boring Historian tonight. We are not walking through a muddy medieval town or a drafty stone castle. Instead, we are venturing into the landscape of the medieval mind itself. Imagine you are in a monastery library, hunched over a heavy, hand-painted map of the world. The parts you knew were up, the Mediterranean are detailed and familiar. But as your eyes travel east, past Jerusalem, the details fall away. The land becomes a vast, mysterious blank space, decorated not with cities and rivers, but with strange beasts, towering giants, and the tantalizing inscription, "Here be dragons." It is in these blank spaces on the map that our story tonight resides. What you're about to hear might stick with you as we explore the legends that were as real to the people of the time as the ground beneath their feet, stories that shaped their world and drove them to the ends of the earth. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. I love seeing our global classroom come to life, so whether you're listening from Europe in the morning or like me, here in Southeast Asia where the evening is settling in, please let me know your location and local time in the comments. Alright, find your quiet space, let the outside world fade, and let's begin our journey. Before we delve into the strange and wonderful tales themselves, you must first adjust your thinking. You must inhabit a medieval mindset. In your modern world, there is a firm, solid line between fact and fiction, between history and myth, between the nightly news and a fantasy novel. In the medieval world, that line was not a solid wall, but a thin, shimmering, and often permeable veil. The world you knew was small, a little pocket of Christian Europe, surrounded on all sides by a vast and mysterious unknown. And that unknown was not assumed to be empty. It was assumed to be filled with wonders, with monstrous races, with lost kingdoms, and with profound spiritual truths. A story told by a traveler from a distant land was not just a story. It was a piece of data, a potential glimpse into a world that was just as real as your own. It is into this mindset, a world hungry for wonders and desperate for hope, that our first great legend is born. The historical setting is the middle of the 12th century. The great religious and military adventures known as the Crusades are in full swing. Small precarious Christian kingdoms have been established in the Holy Land at Jerusalem, Antioch, and Acre. But these kingdoms are tiny, isolated islands of Christendom in the midst of a vast and powerful sea of Muslim empires. They are under constant threat, their survival hanging by a thread. The knights and kings of Europe know that they need an ally. They need a miracle. And it is in this climate of desperate hope that a rumor begins to circulate, a whisper that will grow into one of the most powerful and enduring legends of the age. The rumor is of a man named Prester John. The first concrete mention of him appears in the year 1145 in the writings of a German chronicler named Otto of Freising. He recounts a story that he was told in person by a visiting Syrian bishop. The bishop spoke of a mighty and mysterious Christian king who lived in the Far East, beyond the lands of Persia and Media. This king, named John the Priest, or Prester John, was said to be a devout Nestorian Christian, a member of an ancient branch of the faith that had spread along the Silk Road. And this king, the bishop reported, had recently won a great and decisive battle against the Muslim rulers of Persia. More than that, he was said to be marching his vast armies west, with the goal of coming to the Holy Land to liberate the city of Jerusalem and aid his fellow Christians in their struggle. You can imagine how this news was received in the courts of Europe. It was a bombshell. It was the answer to their prayers. A mighty, fabulously wealthy Christian king, a descendant of one of the three magi no less. Somewhere in the mysterious East, and he was coming to help. The story spread like wildfire, passed from traveler to pilgrim, from court to court. It was the medieval equivalent of a hopeful but completely unverified news story going viral. It was exactly what everyone wanted to believe. And then, about 20 years later, around 1165, the legend exploded. A mysterious and incredible document began to circulate throughout Europe. A document that purported to be a personal letter from Prester John himself, addressed to the great rulers of Christendom, including the Byzantine Emperor and the Pope. This document, known as the Letter of Prester John, is one of an incredible literary creation, a masterpiece of fantasy, propaganda, and wishful thinking that so perfectly captured the medieval imagination that its influence would last for centuries. You are a scholar in a monastery, and a copy of this astonishing letter has just come into your possession. You unroll the parchment and begin to read, and your world is turned upside down. The letter is a detailed travelogue describing Prester John's magnificent kingdom, and it is a realm that defies belief. It is a Christian utopia, a paradise on earth. First, you read of his immense power and wealth. He declares that he is the ruler of the three Indias, and that 72 kings are his loyal vassals. His kingdom is so vast that it takes months to cross. There are no poor people in his lands, no thieves, no liars, no vices at all. The rivers flow not with water, but with milk and honey. In one part of his kingdom, a great river flows directly from the Garden of Eden itself, and its waters are filled not with sand and gravel, but with precious jewels and gemstones. Anyone who finds a stone from this river will be free from illness for the rest of their days. Then you read of the marvels. In the center of his kingdom, there is a miraculous spring. This is the fabled fountain of youth. Anyone who bathes in its waters 3 times will be cured of all infirmities and will be restored to the perfect age of 32, at which they will remain for the rest of their lives. The natural world in his kingdom is a place of wonder. Lions, bears, and even dragons are peaceful and tame, and are used as beasts of burden. Gigantic ants, the size of dogs, dig through the earth, bringing up piles of pure gold, which is then freely available to all his subjects. He possesses a magical mirror, which he can ascend via a great staircase, that allows him to see everything that is happening in every corner of his vast domains, ensuring that justice is always done. His land is also populated by the strange and monstrous races that you have read about in the ancient tales of Alexander the Great. There are giants and pygmies. There are men with horns, men with 3 eyes, and headless men with their faces in their chests. There are centaurs and fauns and other creatures from classical myth, all living together in his peaceful Christian kingdom. All living together in his peaceful Christian kingdom. And in the heart of a great desert of fire, there lives the salamander, a worm-like creature that dwells in the flames. The people of his kingdom, the letter explains, harvest the silky cocoons that these fireworms spin, and from this asbestos-like thread, they weave an unburnable cloth. The robes of Prester John himself are made from this salamander's wool, and when they become dirty, they are not washed with water, but are cleansed by being thrown into a roaring fire. And through it all, Prester John describes himself as the most pious and humble of Christians. He is a priest-king, his title Prester meaning priest. While his worldly power is immense, his personal lifestyle is simple. He lives not in a gilded palace, but in one made of simple wood. He is a devout follower of the teachings of St. Thomas the Apostle, who was believed to have traveled to India. His entire kingdom is a testament to the power and glory of the Christian faith, a shining beacon of what a true Christian society could be. Of course, we now know that this incredible letter was a masterful and brilliant forgery, but for the people of your time, it was taken as absolute fact. It was copied and recopied, translated into multiple languages, and circulated to every corner of Europe. It was a fantasy, but it was a fantasy that perfectly answered the deepest anxieties and desires of the age. But where did this potent and enduring legend come from? Was it purely a work of European wishful thinking, a fantastical story spun from whole cloth in a monastery somewhere in France or Germany? Or was it perhaps a distorted, exaggerated, and misunderstood echo of some distant truth? This is a question that historians still vigorously argue about. What was the original seed of the Prester John myth? The argument for it being a purely European fabrication is a strong one. The letter itself is clearly a literary creation. It cleverly weaves together a host of pre-existing legends, the utopian ideals of a perfect Christian society, the fantastical tales of wonders in the East that were attached to the story of Alexander the Great, and the popular medieval travelogues that were filled with monstrous races and magical beasts. It was a brilliant piece of propaganda, perfectly tailored to boost the morale of the crusading movement and to offer a sense of hope in a time of great struggle. However, other historians argue that you cannot dismiss the legend as pure fantasy. They believe it was a confused and garbled amalgamation of real reports about Christian communities that actually existed far to the east of the Holy Land. For centuries, communities of Nestorian Christians had flourished along the Silk Road, in Persia, Central Asia, and even into China. It is entirely possible that rumors of a powerful Nestorian chieftain or king who had achieved a local military victory could have traveled west along the trade routes, becoming more and more exaggerated with each telling, until the story of a minor exaggerated with each telling. Tribal leader was transformed into the story of a mighty Christian emperor. Early versions of the legend placed Prester John's kingdom in India, which may have been a confused reference to the ancient communities of St. Thomas Christians, who had lived in southern India for centuries. Later, as the Mongol hordes under Genghis Khan swept out of Asia in the 13th century, some in Europe initially believed that this was the army of Prester John finally arriving. The Mongols were not Christian, of course, but they defeated several powerful Muslim empires, and in the desperate logic of the time, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. For a brief period, the great Khan was optimistically identified as the long-awaited Christian king from the east, until, of course, the Mongol armies turned their attention towards Europe itself, as the hopes of finding Prester John in Asia began to fade. The location of his mythical kingdom made a great geographical leap. The ancient, isolated, and devoutly Christian kingdom of Ethiopia, surrounded on all sides by powerful Muslim neighbors, became the final and most enduring candidate for the realm of Prester John. The king of Ethiopia was a powerful Christian ruler. His kingdom was rumored to be fabulously wealthy, and it was tantalizingly out of reach. For the next few centuries, Ethiopia would be the focus of the search. And this search was not just a literary fancy. The legend of Prester John had real and profound consequences. It inspired real-world exploration and diplomacy. Popes and kings took the story so seriously that they dispatched actual missions to find this mythical ally. In 1177, after receiving a copy of the famous letter, Pope Alexander III wrote a reply to his personal physician, Philip, whom he sent on an official diplomatic mission to find Prester John's court. Philip the physician set off on his quest, vanished into the vastness of the East, and was never heard from again. For centuries afterward, the quest to find Prester John was a major driver of the age of exploration. Great explorers like Marco Polo reported hearing stories about him on their travels. And in the 15th century, Portuguese navigators like Prince Henry the Navigator, who were beginning their methodical exploration of the coast of Africa, were explicitly and actively searching for a sea route to the kingdom of Prester John. They hoped to outflank the Ottoman Empire by forging a great Christian alliance with this lost African king. The dream of Prester John was one of the key motivations that propelled European ships into the unknown. You sit in the cold, quiet scriptorium of your monastery. The flickering candlelight making the letters on the page seem to dance. You read of the fountain of youth, of the river of jewels, of the tame dragons and the fireproof salamanders. And in your world, a world where so much is unknown, a world where the maps are full of blank spaces and terrifying monsters, it does not seem impossible. It does not seem like a lie. It seems like a promise. The legend of Prester John is the perfect embodiment of the medieval imagination. It is a rich and heady brew of desperate military hope, sincere religious fervor, profound geographical ignorance, and a boundless, almost childlike, capacity for wonder. It is the dream of a perfect, powerful, and pious Christian ally in a world that seemed to be filled with powerful and dangerous enemies. This grand, outward-looking quest for a lost holy kingdom in a distant land was one of the great obsessions of your age, but it was matched by another, even more profound and personal quest, one that looked not to a map of the world, but inward into the very soul of chivalry and faith, the mystical and mysterious search for the Holy Grail. It is a dream of a perfect Christian ally in a world full of enemies. This grand, outward-looking quest for a lost holy kingdom in a distant land was one of the great obsessions of your age. But it was matched by another, even more profound and personal quest, one that looked not to a map of the world, but inward into the very soul of chivalry and faith. This was a search not for a lost king, but for a lost sacred vessel. This was the mystical and mysterious quest for the Holy Grail. Imagine now that you are no longer a monk in a quiet scriptorium reading tales of the East. You are a knight. You are a member of the most famous and noble fellowship in all of Christendom, the Knights of the Round Table. You sit in the great hall of Camelot, the court of the legendary King Arthur. Your world is one of chivalric ideals. You have fought in great battles. You have rescued damsels. You have overthrown tyrants. And you have established an age of peace and justice in the kingdom of Logos. You and your companions are the very flower of earthly chivalry. But a strange spiritual emptiness has begun to settle over the court. The adventures have become mundane. The purpose has been lost. You have achieved a kind of worldly perfection, but your souls are restless, yearning for a higher purpose. A true spiritual adventure. It is into this atmosphere of spiritual longing that the great mystery appears. It is the Feast of Pentecost, and you and the other 150 knights of the Round Table are gathered in the great hall at Camelot. Suddenly, the doors and windows of the hall close on their own. The room grows dark, and then a great clap of thunder shakes the very foundations of the castle. A brilliant sunbeam, 7 times brighter than normal daylight, lances down into the hall. And riding on that sunbeam, a mysterious object floats into the room. It is the Holy Grail, but it is covered by a cloth of pure white samite, so that none of you can see its true form. The Grail drifts silently through the hall, and as it passes, a miracle occurs. The air is filled with the most beautiful aromas of spice and incense, and before each knight, the empty platters are suddenly, magically filled with his own favorite food. The Grail serves you all, and then, as silently as it arrived, it floats out of the hall and vanishes. For a long moment, there is a stunned silence. You are all speechless, overwhelmed by the divine vision you have just witnessed. Then Sir Gawain, one of the greatest of your company, rises to his feet. He declares that this brief veiled glimpse is not enough. He makes a solemn vow that he will ride out from the court for a year and a day, and he will not return until he has found the Grail and has looked upon it openly, unveiled. One by one, every other knight in the hall, including yourself, rises and makes the same vow. King Arthur is heartbroken. He knows that this quest will be the end of his glorious fellowship, that many of his knights will never return. But the vow has been made, and it cannot be unmade. The great Grail quest has begun. But what is this strange, miraculous object that you have all sworn to find? The answer is more complex than you might think, because the nature of the Grail evolved over time. When it first appeared in literature, in an unfinished French romance from the late 12th century called Percival, the story of the Grail, written by the poet Chrétien de Troyes. It is not explicitly the cup of Christ. In this original telling, a young naive knight named Percival comes to the mysterious castle of the Fisher King, a monarch who is suffering from a grievous wound. During a feast, Percival witnesses a strange procession. A boy carries a bleeding lance, two others carry golden candelabras, and finally, a beautiful maiden carries a vessel called untold. Chrétien describes it simply as a wide, deep platter or dish made of pure gold and set with the most precious jewels. And it is so bright that it outshines all the candles in the hall. It contains not a drink, but a single communion wafer, which is the only thing that sustains the Fisher King's crippled ancient father. The object is clearly holy, it is clearly magical, and it is clearly a source of life. But it is not, in this first telling, the cup from the Last Supper. It was the writers who came after Chrétien, who took his mysterious platter and fused it with another powerful Christian legend. The poet Robert de Boron, writing a few years later, was the first to explicitly identify the Grail as the cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper. He further added that this was the very same cup that Joseph of Arimathea, a secret disciple of Jesus, used to catch the drops of Christ's blood as he hung on the cross. Joseph then brought this holiest of all relics with him when he traveled to the distant land of Britain. This is the version of the Grail story that became dominant, the one that you, as a knight of the Round Table, now believe. You are not searching for a mysterious platter. You are searching for the cup that held the blood of your Savior. And so, you and the other 149 knights ride out from Camelot. But you do not ride as an army. King Arthur's nephew, Sir Gawain, decrees that it would be a dishonor to ride in a group. This is a personal quest, a test of each individual knight's soul. And so, you all ride to the edge of a great dark forest, and each knight enters at a point of his own choosing, at a place where there is no path. Your quest begins by plunging into the unknown alone. You soon discover that this is not a normal adventure. The forest you ride through is a symbolic, allegorical landscape. The quest is not a physical challenge, but a spiritual one. You will not find the Grail by being the strongest knight or the most skilled in battle. You will find it only if you are spiritually pure. The forest is filled with strange encounters, with mysterious hermits who explain the meaning of your visions, with damsels who represent temptation, and with demonic phantoms who try to lead you into sin. Every choice you make, every battle you fight, is a test of your moral and spiritual worth. Many of the greatest knights of the Round Table, the very paragons of earthly chivalry, find that their worldly skills are useless here. You hear tales of your companions' struggles. Sir Lancelot, the most famous and revered knight in all the world, the man who has never lost a joust or a battle, is brought low by his one great sin, his secret, adulterous love for King Arthur's wife, Queen Guinevere. This sin makes him unworthy to achieve the Grail. He is granted a brief, veiled glimpse of the holy vessel, but its divine power strikes him down, and he lies in a death-like trance for 24 days as a penance. He learns to his great sorrow that being the best knight on earth is not the same as being the best Christian. Sir Gawain, noble and brave, also fails. He is too focused on the rules of worldly chivalry, on quests and adventures, and not on the state of his own soul. He is too quick to rely on his own strength, and not on the grace of God. In his pride, he fails to show the humility and piety required to succeed. The quest proves that the entire code of earthly chivalry, which you have all lived by, is insufficient for this new spiritual challenge. So who can succeed? The romances tell us that the quest is achieved by only 3 knights. The first is Sir Bors. He is a good and honorable man, and unlike most of the other knights, he is not a great sinner. He is loyal, he is steadfast, and he successfully resists the temptations that are thrown in his path. He achieves the Grail not through spectacular prowess, but through simple dogged virtue. The second is Sir Percival. He was the original hero of the Grail stories. He is an innocent, a pure-hearted, noble fool who was raised in seclusion in the forests of Wales by his mother, in a deliberate attempt to keep him from the violent world of knighthood. He begins his journey in a state of almost complete ignorance, but through his trials, he slowly learns the true meaning of chivalry, of faith, and of grace. His story is one of spiritual education and growth, and the final and most perfect Grail knight is Sir Galahad. He was an invention of the later Grail romances, created to be the ultimate spiritual warrior. He is the illegitimate son of the great but sinful Sir Lancelot. But unlike his father, Galahad is a pure and virginal knight, a kind of military monk, a Christ figure in armor. He is destined for this quest from the moment of his birth. He is the only knight who can sit in the Siege Perilous, the empty seat at the round table which is reserved for the one knight who will succeed in the Grail quest, and which is instantly fatal to any unworthy knight who dares to sit in it. Galahad is without sin, and so he moves through the enchanted forest of the quest with an aura of divine protection. But where did this strange, beautiful, and deeply complex story of a spiritual quest for a mysterious vessel actually come from? Was it, as its later authors intended, a purely Christian allegory, a complex meditation on the nature of the Eucharist and divine grace, written by and for a devout and sophisticated courtly audience? Or are its roots older, deeper, and stranger, tangled in the mists of pre-Christian Celtic mythology? This is a question that has fascinated historians and folklorists for generations, and they still argue fiercely over the true origins of the Grail legend. The argument for a purely Christian origin is strong, especially for the later, more famous versions of the story. The great 13th century quest of the Holy Grail was likely written by a Cistercian monk, and its theology is complex and orthodox. The entire quest is framed as an allegory for the individual soul's journey towards God. The Grail itself is a symbol of a direct, mystical encounter with the grace of God, a grace that cannot be earned through worldly deeds, but is given freely to the pure of heart. However, the argument for older, pagan origins is equally compelling, especially when you look at the earliest Grail story by Chrétien de Troyes. The story is filled with elements that seem to have very little to do with Christianity, and a great deal to do with ancient Welsh and Irish myths. The figure of the wounded fisher king, for instance, is very similar to older Celtic mythological figures, kings whose physical health is mystically tied to the health of their land. Because the king is wounded, his kingdom has become a barren and sterile wasteland. The quest of the hero is to heal the king, and in so doing, restore the land to fertility. And the Grail itself, in its earliest form as a platter that provides endless magical sustenance, is strikingly similar to the magic cauldrons of plenty that appear in many Celtic myths. These cauldrons, like the cauldron of the god Dagda, could produce an endless supply of food. Other mythical cauldrons could even resurrect the dead. From this perspective, the Holy Grail is a Christianized version of a much older and more primal pagan symbol of life, rebirth, and plenty. A wry observer might say that one culture's magic cauldron is another culture's holy relic. The truth is likely that the Grail legend is a rich and wonderful fusion of both traditions, a story where ancient Celtic mythology was reshaped and reinterpreted through the lens of medieval Christian spirituality. Now let us return to the quest itself. The three successful knights, Galahad, Percival, and Bors, their spiritual trials complete, finally arrive at the mystical Grail castle of Corbenic. Here, they are granted the ultimate vision. They are allowed to look upon the Grail unveiled. They take part in a celestial mass performed by Joseph of Arimathea himself, and they have a direct, unmediated experience of the divine. Their quest on earth is now over. They take the Holy Grail and the bleeding lance and travel on a magical ship to the holy city of Saras, a mystical location in the spiritual east. There Galahad is made king. After a year of perfect rule, he has one final, perfect vision of the Grail's deepest mysteries, and his soul is taken up to heaven by a host of angels. As he ascends, a heavenly hand reaches down and takes the Grail and the lance back up into the sky. They are never to be seen on earth again. Percival, his quest also complete, retires to a hermitage and dies soon after. Of the three who achieved the quest, only the steadfast Sir Bors returns to Camelot to tell the tale, and the tale he tells is a sorrowful one. The Grail quest, while a spiritual triumph for a chosen few, has been an utter disaster for the worldly fellowship of the Round Table. The quest for heavenly perfection has shattered the earthly perfection of Arthur's court. Most of the other knights were killed on their lonely journeys. The bonds of fellowship have been broken. Lancelot's sin with the Queen has been brought into the open, a wound that will fester and ultimately destroy the kingdom. The quest for the Holy Grail marks the beginning of the end of the Golden Age of Camelot. You, as a knight of the Round Table, have returned from your long and perilous journey, weary and humbled. You did not achieve the Grail. You were found wanting. But the quest has changed you. You have been tested to the limits of your physical and spiritual endurance, and you have been forced to confront the state of your own soul. The legend of the Holy Grail is a complex, beautiful, and deeply melancholy story. It is a story about the great tension between the demands of earthly chivalry and the purity of heavenly grace. It represents the highest and most painfully unattainable spiritual aspiration of the entire knightly class. But the lofty spiritual dreams of knights were not the dreams of all. The vast majority of the population, the poor, laboring peasants, had their own legends of a perfect mythical land that was not heavenly but very, very, very earthly indeed. The quest for the Holy Grail is a complex, beautiful, and deeply melancholy story. It is a story about the great tension between the demands of earthly chivalry and the purity of heavenly grace. It represents the highest and most painfully unattainable spiritual aspiration of the entire knightly class, a dream of divine union and a personal encounter with God. But the lofty spiritual dreams of knights were not the dreams of all. For the vast majority of the population, for you, the common peasant toiling in the fields, the concept of a spiritual paradise was a distant and abstract thing. Your daily reality was one of endless back-breaking labor and a constant gnawing hunger. Your dreams of a perfect world were not of a shimmering ethereal cup in a mystical castle. Your paradise was much more tangible, much more immediate, and much more delicious. Your paradise was the land of Cocaine. Imagine you are standing in a muddy field at dawn, your back already aching from a lifetime of stooping to the earth. Your hands are calloused and rough from the plow. Your stomach is filled with a thin, watery pottage and a piece of dark, gritty bread. You will work this field until the sun sets, and tomorrow you will do it again. Your life is governed by two great forces: the Lord of the Manor, who demands your labor and a share of your crops, and the priest in the village church, who preaches to you every Sunday about the virtues of toil, the importance of fasting, and the sinfulness of earthly pleasure. Your life is defined by scarcity and by work. It is in the face of this grim reality that the legend of Cocaine is born. It is not a story you would find in a great illuminated manuscript in a nobleman's library. It is a story told by the fireside on a cold winter's night. It is a song sung in a smoky tavern after the ale has been flowing freely. It is a poem shared among your fellow workers as you rest for a moment from your labors. It is a collective dream, a folk legend that imagines a world where every single hardship of your peasant life has been turned completely upside down. It is a utopia built not on spiritual purity, but on the glorious and wonderful principles of absolute idleness and endless gluttony. So let us take a journey to this mythical land, which the stories say lies somewhere far to the west of Spain. The first thing you notice as you arrive in Cocaigne is the architecture. The houses are not made of wattle and daub and rough-hewn timber. They are built entirely of food. The walls of the cottages are made of thick, savory pies and freshly baked bread. The roofs are tiled with flaky pastries and sweet, sticky cakes. The shingles are slices of gingerbread, and the window panes are made not of glass, but of clear sugar candy. The fences that divide the properties are woven not from wood, but from sizzling, plump sausages. One can only imagine that the building codes in Cocaigne are rather relaxed, and that a heavy rainstorm could pose a serious threat to the structural integrity of your gingerbread roof. You walk down a street paved with golden brown waffles, and you come to a river. But the river does not flow with water. This river flows with rich red wine. In other parts of the land, there are rivers of fine, strong ale, of fresh milk, or even of bubbling custard. You need only to dip your cup or your entire head into the stream to drink your fill. You look up at the sky and you notice that it has begun to rain, but the drops are not of water. They are drops of tangy, delicious cheese, or perhaps a light shower of spiced cakes. The natural world itself has been transformed into a landscape of instant gratification. The trees in the forest do not bear inedible leaves and acorns. They grow ready-to-wear clothing. One tree might be laden with fine woolen tunics in bright colors, another with sturdy leather shoes, and another with soft linen shirts, all perfectly sized and waiting for you to simply pluck them from the branch. The stones that litter the fields are not stones at all, but are in fact giant, round loaves of bread and massive wheels of sharp, aged cheese. And the animals in Cocaigne exist only to serve your appetite in the most direct and convenient way possible. You see a herd of pigs wandering through a field. They are not normal pigs. They are pre-cooked, roasted to a perfect golden brown, and each one has a sharp carving knife already stuck in its back, so you can slice off a piece of crackling whenever you feel a bit peckish. You look up and see a flock of roasted geese flying slowly through the air, their skins glistening with fat. They fly directly towards you, crying out in unison, "Eat me! Eat me!" and obligingly fly right into your open mouth. There's no need for hunting, no need for butchery, no need for the messy and laborious business of cooking. In Cocaigne, every creature's fondest wish is to be your dinner. The society of this land is a perfect and satirical inversion of your own. The two greatest virtues in your world, hard work and religious self-denial, are the two greatest crimes in Cocaigne. The most revered and respected citizen is the one who can sleep the longest. In fact, a popular version of the legend claims that to even enter Cocaigne, you must first sleep for 7 years straight. Once you are there, the laziest man is considered the king, and people pay him rent, not the other way around. Gluttony is not a deadly sin. It is the highest virtue. Fasting is a punishable offense. The more you can eat and drink, the more pious and honorable you are considered to be. The weather is always perfect, a gentle and temperate spring day. There is no sickness and no arguments, and there is no need for money because everything is free and abundant. The legend of Cocaigne also shares one key feature with the far-off, mythical kingdom of Prester John. It has a fountain of youth, but this is a much more accessible and democratic fountain. Any old man or woman who feels the aches and pains of age can simply go for a swim in the fountain, and they will emerge young, beautiful, and full of energy once more. So what was the real point of this absurd, gluttonous, and deeply funny fantasy? Was it just a simple, escapist dream? A way for a poor and hungry population to find a moment of comfort? Or was it something more pointed? A clever and deeply subversive satire of the powers that ruled their lives? This is a question that historians and folklorists still argue about. What was the true social function of the cocaine myth? The argument for it being simple escapism is easy to understand. When your entire life is defined by scarcity and relentless, backbreaking labor, dreaming of a world of free food and endless sleep is a very natural psychological coping mechanism. It is a fantasy that provides a temporary mental release from a harsh and unforgiving reality. It is the medieval peasant's equivalent of buying a lottery ticket, a dream of a life of effortless luxury. But many scholars argue that there is a much sharper and more satirical edge to the legend. They see cocaine as a deliberate and clever parody of the established order, particularly the church and the nobility. The entire legend is a point-by-point mockery of Christian virtues. The deadly sins of gluttony and sloth become the highest virtues. The pious act of fasting is outlawed. The rivers of wine are a clear parody of the wine of the Eucharist and the water of baptism. The very idea of a physical, earthly paradise of food and comfort stands in direct opposition to the Church's promise of a purely spiritual paradise in the next life. A paradise that can only be reached through suffering and self-denial in this one. The legend also satirizes the aristocratic ideal of heaven. While you, the peasant, dream of a land of sausages and cheese, the knights and ladies of the court dream of the Holy Grail, an ethereal, spiritual quest. Cocaine is a thumb in the eye to this high-minded, aristocratic spirituality. It is a declaration that a peasant's paradise is not about seeing God, but about getting a decent meal without having to work for it. It is a powerful, if humorous, critique of a social and religious system that demands your endless labor and piety in this life, with only the promise of a non-specific reward in the next. This satirical intent is perhaps most clear in the darkly humorous entry requirement that is a part of some versions of the tale. To reach this land of ultimate ease and pleasure, you must first perform a final, monumental, and truly disgusting act of labor. You must wade for 7 full years through a vast ditch filled with human filth and manure. Only by enduring the absolute worst and most abject aspect of your earthly peasant reality can you finally break through to the paradise on the other side. It is a final bitter joke about the nature of your life. The legend of cocaine was immensely popular and widespread. It appears in poems and stories all across Europe, known as Lulekkerland, lazy, delicious land in the Netherlands, and Schlaraffenland, Sluggard's Land in Germany. It later inspired one of the most famous paintings of the Northern Renaissance, Peter Bruegel the Elder's The Land of Cocaine, which perfectly captures the gluttonous, lazy utopia, with a knight, a farmer, and a scholar all sleeping off a massive meal under a tree from which a table laden with food grows. You lie back on your thin straw mattress, your body aching from a long day of work in your lord's fields. Your stomach rumbles with the memory of the thin pottage that was your supper. You close your eyes, and you escape. You dream of cocaine. You dream of the warm rivers of wine, of the houses made of cake, and of the roasted geese that fly obligingly into your mouth. It is a silly, it is an impossible, and it is a beautiful and comforting dream. It is your mind's rebellion against the endless hardship of your life, a testament to your humor and your imagination. This legend, so different from the noble spiritual quest for the Grail, reveals the deepest desires and the satirical, irreverent wit of the common people. But not all of the great folk legends of your time were so cheerful and harmless. Some were born not from a dream of paradise, but from a nightmare of loss. Some spoke not of a land of plenty found, but of a generation of children stolen away forever. We must now travel from the mythical land of cocaine to the very real German town of Hamelin, to hear the unsettling and deeply mysterious music of the Pied Piper. The legend of cocaine reveals the deepest desires and the satirical wit of the common people. It is a rebellion of the imagination against the hardships of their daily lives. But not all of the great folk legends of your time were so cheerful and harmless. Some were born not from a dream of paradise, but from a nightmare of loss. Some spoke not of a land of plenty found, but of a generation of children stolen away forever. A chilling story rooted not in pure fantasy, but in a mysterious and terrifying historical event. We must now travel from the mythical land of Cockaigne to the very real German town of Hamelin to hear the unsettling and deeply mysterious music of the Pied Piper. Imagine now that you are a citizen of Hamelin in the year 1284. Your town is a prosperous and proud one, a bustling center of trade on the banks of the Weser River. But your prosperity is being devoured. You are suffering from a catastrophe, a plague of rats. They are everywhere. They are a squeaking, chittering tide of filth that swarms through your streets and infests your homes. You find them in your grain stores, spoiling your food. You find them in your kitchens, bold and unafraid. You hear them scratching and gnawing in the walls as you try to sleep. The situation has become unbearable. It is a public health crisis and an economic disaster, and the town's leaders are at their wits' end. Then one day, a stranger walks into town. He is a tall, thin man, and he is dressed in the most peculiar clothes you have ever seen. His tunic and hose are made of brightly colored cloth, sewn together in a patchwork of red, green, yellow, and blue. He is a pied man, a multicolored man. His strange, flamboyant clothing immediately marks him as an outsider, a wanderer, perhaps an entertainer or a juggler. A wry observer might say his fashion sense was a very bold choice for a grim and serious German town. In his hand he carries nothing but a simple wooden pipe. He goes before the mayor and the town council and makes a straightforward and astonishing offer. He tells them that he is a professional rat catcher, and that for a certain price, let's say 1,000 guildershi, will rid your town of every single rat. The mayor and the council, desperate and seeing no other solution, quickly agree to his terms. A bargain is struck. The piper walks into the center of the market square. He raises the simple pipe to his lips and begins to play. It is a strange and enchanting melody, a high, thin, and piercing tune that seems to get inside your very bones. And as he plays, the first miracle begins to happen. From the cellars and the sewers, from the rafters of the guild halls and the pantries of your homes, the rats begin to emerge. They pour out into the streets, a great, gray, squeaking river of vermin, their eyes blinking in the daylight. They are utterly mesmerized by the piper's music, and they begin to follow him as he walks through the town. He leads the horrifying procession out of the town gates. He walks down the path that leads to the wide, fast-flowing Weser River, and without hesitation, the entire army of rats follows him straight into the water, where they are all swept away and drowned. The piper has fulfilled his side of the bargain. The town of Hamelin is saved. A great celebration begins. The citizens rejoice, relieved to be free from the plague of rats. The next day, the piper returns to the town hall to collect his promised fee. He stands before the mayor and the council and asks for his 1,000 guilders. But now that the threat is gone, the burghers of Hamelin have had a change of heart. They look at this strange pied man, this wandering vagrant, and their gratitude curdles into arrogance and greed. 1,000 guilders seems like a ridiculous amount of money to pay for a simple tune on a pipe. They laugh at him. They refuse to honor their agreement, offering him instead a paltry sum, perhaps only 50 guilders, a fraction of what they had promised. They tell him to take it or leave it, and to be on his way. The piper's friendly expression vanishes. His face darkens with a cold and quiet anger. He warns the mayor that to break a promise is a serious thing, and that they will live to regret their greed. He turns and leaves the town hall, his 50 guilders uncollected. The town leaders, convinced they have gotten the better of a simple vagrant, congratulate themselves on their cleverness. Life returns to normal, but the piper does not forget. He waits. And on the morning of June 26th, the holy day of Saints John and Paul, while most of the adults of the town are gathered in the church for Mass, he returns. He walks once more into the market square, and he raises his pipe to his lips. But this time, he plays a different tune. It is a melody of an even more unearthly and irresistible beauty. A tune that seems to promise a world of wonders and delights. And this time, it is not the rats who answer his call. The doors of the houses swing open, and from them come the children of Hamelin. Every child over the age of 4, all the boys and girls of the town, come running out into the street, their faces alight with a strange, rapturous joy. They are completely enchanted, their eyes fixed on the piper. You are in the church, and you hear the beautiful, haunting music from outside, and for some reason you cannot move. Or perhaps you are at home, and you see your own children run out the door, and you find yourself frozen, paralyzed, unable to stop them. The piper, still playing his enchanting tune, begins to walk, and behind him, a great procession of 130 of the town's children follows, dancing and skipping as they go. He leads them out of the eastern gate of the town. He leads them up a nearby hill known as the Koppenberg. And as they reach a certain spot, a mysterious dark opening, a cave or a door, appears in the side of the hill. The Pied Piper walks into the darkness, and all 130 children follow him in without a moment's hesitation. And then the opening in the hillside closes behind them, sealing them inside. And they are never, ever seen again. The music stops. The spell is broken. Parents of Hamelin rush out into the street calling their children's names. But there is no answer. The town is silent once more, but this is a far more terrible silence than the one that came before. The joy and the future of the entire town have vanished in a single morning. According to the legend, only 2 or 3 children were left behind to tell the tale. One was a lame boy who could not keep up with the dancing procession and was left behind when the door to the hill closed. Another was a deaf child who saw the others leaving but could not hear the enchanting music. And a third was a blind child who could hear the music and followed it but could not see where they were going and became lost. They are the only witnesses to the town's terrible, unbearable loss. This is a chilling and unforgettable fairy tale. But here is the most disturbing part. It is not just a fairy tale. While the details may have been embellished over the centuries, there is a solid, documented historical event at the story's core. The earliest known reference comes not from a book of folk tales, but from the town of Hamelin itself. A beautiful stained glass window was created for the market church around the year 1300. Only 16 years after the event. That window, which was sadly destroyed in the 17th century, was described in later accounts. It depicted a piper in multicolored clothes, leading a group of white-clad children away, and an inscription on the window explicitly stated that on the 26th of June, in the year 1284, on the day of Saints John and Paul, 130 children, born in Hamelin, were led out of the town by a piper and lost at the place of execution near the Koppenberg hill. Furthermore, the official town chronicles of Hamelin for many years contained entries confirming the event, and for centuries the town's legal documents were dated not just with the year of the Lord, but with the phrase, "in the year since our children left." The rats, it turns out, are a much later addition to the story, first appearing in the 16th century. They were likely added to the legend to provide a clear narrative motivation for the piper's actions, to turn the story into a simple fable about the importance of paying your debts. But the original historical core of the legend is much starker and more mysterious. It is not about rats. It is simply about the sudden, unexplained, and permanent disappearance of 130 children. So if this event really happened, what is the historical explanation? What could possibly account for the disappearance of an entire generation of a town's youth? This is the great mystery of the Pied Piper and historians have proposed a number of compelling, if unprovable, theories. The most common theory is that the story is a metaphor for a devastating outbreak of disease. The figure of the piper, with his strange clothes and his deadly music, is a personification of death itself. A sudden, virulent epidemic could easily have swept through the town, and for reasons we don't understand, it might have been particularly deadly to children. The story of them being led away to a hill is a poetic way of describing their mass death and their subsequent burial in a common grave, a plague pit outside the town. Another theory suggests that the disappearance was the result of a mass accident. The children of the town might have been gathered together for a summer festival or a religious procession. A terrible tragedy could have occurred. A newly built bridge over the Weser River could have collapsed, drowning them all. Or a sudden landslide on the Koppenberg Hill could have buried them. The figure of the piper would then have been invented later, a supernatural scapegoat to explain a natural, but no less horrifying, disaster. A third theory connects the legend to the strange phenomenon of the so-called children's crusades of the early 13th century. These were movements where charismatic preachers would whip up religious fervor among young people, convincing them to leave their homes and march to the Holy Land. These crusades were always disastrous, with most of the children dying of starvation or being sold into slavery along the way. It is possible that such a recruiter, a piper, with his enchanting promises of glory and salvation, passed through Hamelin in 1284 and lured the town's youth away on a similar fatal pilgrimage. Perhaps the most plausible and most widely accepted historical theory connects the legend to a major social and demographic movement of the time: the German colonization of Eastern Europe, known as the Ostsiedlung. During the 13th century, there were organized efforts by German nobles and bishops to recruit settlers to move east and colonize new lands in places like Bohemia, Poland, Moravia, and even Transylvania. A recruiting agent working for a nobleman in the east would have been a charismatic figure dressed in fancy clothes to attract attention, who would travel from town to town, playing music and making grand promises of a better life and free land in aging. Grand promises of a better life and free land in the new territories. It is very possible that such a piper came to Hamelin and convinced a large group of the town's young people, not just small children, but teenagers and young adults, to leave their homes and emigrate to the east. The story of them disappearing into a hill would then be a metaphor for their long journey into the unknown mountains and forests of Eastern Europe, a journey from which they never returned to Hamelin. You are now a parent in the town of Hamelin, a member of a community that has been hollowed out, its future stolen away in a single inexplicable afternoon. The legend of the Pied Piper is a chilling and profoundly unsettling folk memory because at its heart it is true. A community lost its children, and they used the story of a magical musician and a broken promise to try and make sense of an unbearable and unexplained historical trauma. It is a story about a debt unpaid and a terrible price exacted. The sorrow of this legend is a communal one, a tragedy that befell an entire town. But some of the great legends of your age focused not on the fate of a community, but on the strange and sorrowful fate of a single solitary individual. A man condemned to a punishment even worse than the loss of a child, the loss of death itself. We now turn from the lost children of Hamelin to meet the most tragic and enduring of all medieval legendary figures, the Wanderer. It is a story about a communal failure, a debt unpaid. It serves as a permanent warning, carved into the town's own memory. The sorrow of this legend is communal, a tragedy that befell an entire town. But some of the great legends of your age focused not on the fate of a community, but on the strange and sorrowful fate of a single solitary individual, a man condemned to a punishment even worse than the loss of a child, the loss of death itself. We now turn from the lost children of Hamelin to meet the most tragic and enduring of all medieval legendary figures, the Wanderer. Imagine you are sitting in the common room of a crowded tavern, or perhaps seeking shelter from a storm in a monastic guest house. A stranger enters. He is old, but he does not seem frail. He carries a simple wooden staff, and his clothes are of a strange archaic cut, dusty from a long, long road. He has a great, flowing beard, and his eyes are what you notice most. They are filled with a weariness so profound, so ancient, that it seems to hold the weight of centuries. He accepts a cup of ale, and someone asks him where he has traveled from. He smiles a sad, tired smile, and he begins to tell his story. And he tells you that he has traveled from Jerusalem, not recently, but in the time of the Lord himself. He claims to be a man who was alive when Jesus of Nazareth walked the earth, and he tells you of his one terrible sin. On the day of the crucifixion, as Jesus was struggling through the streets of Jerusalem, carrying the heavy wooden cross on his battered shoulders, he stumbled and paused for a single moment, hoping to rest against the wall of this man's workshop. The man a shoemaker, some stories say, or perhaps a doorkeeper for Pontius Pilate, was annoyed by the delay and by the spectacle. He pushed Jesus away or struck him and said with a sneer, go on faster. Why do you linger?" Jesus, in his agony, looked at this man and pronounced a curse, a sentence of terrifying and poetic justice. He said, "I am going, and I shall rest. But you shall tarry, and you shall wander until I come again." And in that moment, the man's fate was sealed. He was cursed with immortality. Now, you must understand that this is not the kind of immortality you might see in a modern fantasy story, a life of eternal youth and power. It is a terrible, grinding, and endless penance. The first part of his curse is that he must wander. He can never settle down, never find a home. The moment he begins to feel comfortable in a town or a village, an irresistible restlessness, a divine and agonizing urge, forces him to pack his few belongings and move on. He is doomed to walk the earth's roads forever. The second part of his curse is that he cannot die. He watches the seasons turn into years, the years into decades, the decades into centuries. He sees empires rise and crumble into dust. He watches the children he befriends grow into old men and women, and then wither and die. He sees generations of humanity play out their brief, frantic lives, while he alone remains, an unchanging, eternal witness to it all. In some versions of the legend, he is frozen at the exact age he was when he was cursed. In others, he lives out a human lifespan, aging to become a weary old man of 100 years, at which point he falls into a death-like trance, only to reawaken as a young man of 30 once more, forced to live through the slow decay of age all over again in an endless, painful cycle of rejuvenation. His immortality is not a superpower. It is a prison cell from which there is no escape until the day of judgment. This story of an immortal, cursed wanderer is an ancient one, with roots in many cultures. But the specific legend as you know it, the story of the man who spurned Jesus, erupts into the consciousness of Christian Europe in the 13th century. And it does so not as a folk tale, but as a piece of historical fact, reported by a respectable source. The story appears in one of the great chronicles of the age, the Flores Historiam, written by the English monk and historian Roger of Wendover around the year 1228. Roger recounts a recent visit to his abbey at St. Albans by a delegation of Armenian bishops. The English monks, eager for news of the East, asked the archbishop many questions. They asked him about the great Noah's Ark, which was believed to be still resting on Mount Ararat in his lands. And they asked him if he had any knowledge of a famous figure of whom they had heard rumors, a man named Joseph, who was said to be still alive and who had spoken with the Lord. The Armenian archbishop replied with a solemn and startling confirmation. He told the English monks that yes, this man was indeed real, and that he himself knew him. The archbishop had recently had the man to dinner at his own table. He explained that the man's original name was Cartaphilus. He had been a Roman, a gatekeeper in the service of Pontius Pilate. It was he who had struck Jesus and told him to move faster. After his cursing, Cartaphilus had wandered the earth and had later converted to Christianity, been baptized by the great evangelist Ananias, and taken the name Joseph. He now lived a life of extreme piety and penitence, spending his time in the company of bishops and holy men, telling the story of the life and death of Christ as a first-hand witness. He never smiled or laughed. He was a grave and sorrowful man, waiting patiently for the end of the world to finally release him from his curse. You can imagine the impact of this story. It was not a peasant's fireside tale. This was a contemporary account, reported by a respected historian, based on the eyewitness testimony of a visiting archbishop. It gave the legend an incredible weight of authority and credibility. The story of Cartaphilus spread like wildfire, copied into other chronicles, and told and retold across the continent. Over the centuries, the legend continued to evolve, adapting to new times and new anxieties. The name and identity of the wanderer began to change. While the earliest version, that of the Roman doorkeeper Cartaphilus, remained popular, a new and more sinister version of the story emerged in Germany in the 16th century and quickly became the most famous one of all. In a popular pamphlet printed in 1602, the wanderer is no longer a Roman. He is now a Jewish shoemaker living in Jerusalem, and his name is Ahasuerus. The basic story of his sin remains the same. He refuses to allow Jesus to rest for a moment on a stone bench outside his workshop. But the shift in his identity from a Roman to a Jew is a significant and a deeply troubling one. And this leads us to the great debate that still surrounds this powerful myth. What was the true purpose of this story? Was it a simple theological cautionary tale? A parable about the importance of showing compassion and the terrible consequences of a single moment of sin? Or, in its later and more popular form, did it serve a much darker and more dangerous social and political purpose? Historians still argue about the true function of the legend of the wanderer. The argument for it being a theological parable is strongest when looking at the early Cartaphilus version. Here the story is a straightforward cautionary tale. It is about a personal, individual sin of pride and cruelty. The focus is on the man's repentance. He has converted to Christianity, and he lives a life of quiet piety. A sorrowful but holy figure who acts as a living testament to the historical truth of the Gospels. He is a tragic figure, but he is not a monstrous one. He is an object of a kind of sorrowful pity. However, when you look at the later version, the story of Ahasuerus, the Jewish shoemaker, the function of the legend takes a much more sinister turn. By making the wanderer explicitly a Jewish man, the story was co-opted and transformed into a powerful and insidious tool of anti-Semitic propaganda in the deeply hostile worldview of much of medieval and early modern Christendom. The Jewish people as a whole were seen as being collectively responsible for the death of Christ. The legend of Ahasuerus became a living embodiment of this prejudice. He became a symbol for the entire Jewish people, who were seen as being divinely cursed to be exiled from their homeland and to wander the earth as stateless outcasts, as a punishment for their collective sin of rejecting Jesus as the Messiah. The tragic, repentant individual of the earlier legend was twisted into a hateful caricature, a symbol used to justify the persecution and marginalization of an entire people. The legend was so powerful and so widely believed that people everywhere claimed to have actually met this immortal man. Throughout the late medieval and early modern periods, reports would surface from all corners of Europe, from Spain, from Italy, from Germany, from Sweden. A story would spread through a town that a mysterious ancient stranger had appeared. He had spoken with the local priest or professor, and had displayed a shocking first-hand knowledge of historical events from centuries past. He had spoken of the court of Charlemagne or the campaigns of the Roman legions as if he had been there himself. He would stay for a day or two, a figure of awe and mystery, and then he would vanish as quietly as he had arrived, back on his endless road. These reported sightings, whether they were hoaxes, cases of mistaken identity, or simply rumors, all served to reinforce the powerful belief that he was real, and that his eternal penance was still being carried out among them. The ancient stranger at your inn finishes his cup of ale. He nods his thanks, his ancient eyes filled with a sadness you cannot begin to comprehend. He leaves a single old-looking coin on the table, rises without a word, and walks out into the night, disappearing down the long, dark road. You are left sitting by the fire, a profound chill settling over you. Have you just heard another traveler's tall tale, a clever story designed to get him a free drink? Or have you truly, for a fleeting moment, come face to face with the man cursed to walk the earth until the end of time? The legend of the Wanderer is a profound and deeply melancholy myth. It is a story about sin, about regret, and about the unimaginable horror of a life that is not allowed to end. It is the story of a single solitary individual bearing a unique and terrible divine curse for all of eternity. But some of the legends of your age dealt with a curse of a different and perhaps even more terrifying kind. It was a curse that was not divine, but was earthly and monstrous. It was a curse that could fall upon anyone, your neighbor, your friend, even yourself. A curse that could transform a familiar human being into a ravenous, bloodthirsty beast. We now leave the lonely road of the eternal wanderer, and we head deep into the moonlit forest to confront the terrifying legend of the werewolf. The sorrow of this legend is a communal one, a tragedy that befell an entire town. But some of the great legends of your age focus not on the fate of a community, but on the strange and sorrowful fate of a single, solitary individual. A man condemned to a punishment even worse than the loss of a child. The loss of death itself. The loss of death itself. We now turn from the lost children of Hamelin to meet the most tragic and enduring of all medieval legendary figures, the Wanderer. But the curse of the Wanderer was a divine one, a punishment from God that set him apart from all humanity. Some legends, however, spoke of a curse that was different, a curse that was earthly, monstrous, and deeply rooted in the darkest corners of the forest and the human soul. It was a curse that did not grant eternal life, but transformed that life into a nightmare of blood and violence. We must now leave the lonely, dusty road of the eternal wanderer and venture deep into the moonlit forest to confront the terrifying legend of the werewolf. Imagine you are living in a small, isolated village, a little cluster of cottages huddled together at the very edge of a vast, dark, and ancient forest. The forest is a place of both bounty and danger. It provides you with firewood, with nuts and berries, with game to hunt. But it is also the home of the wolf. The wolf, for you, is not a romantic symbol of wildness. It is a real and ever-present threat. You have heard the stories from the shepherds of wolves snatching lambs from the flock. You've seen their tracks in the mud just beyond the village palisade. On rare, terrifying occasions, a lone traveler or a child who has wandered too far from home has been attacked. The wolf is a real monster at your doorstep. And in your world, the line between this real natural wolf and a far more terrifying supernatural one is dangerously thin and blurry. Any wolf that seems unusually large, unusually bold, or unusually cunning could be suspected of being something more. Every savage, unexplained attack, every disappearance at the edge of the woods could be the work of a werewolf. The belief in the werewolf, the loup-garou, as it is called in France, is a deep and ancient one. It is the story of a man who, through a terrible curse or a demonic pact, possesses the ability to transform himself into the shape and nature of a great wolf. He may keep his human intelligence, but he is driven by a wolf's insatiable, ravenous hunger, and his preferred prey is not livestock but human flesh. This belief was widespread across all levels of your society. It was not just a peasant superstition. Theologians debated the nature of the transformation, and noble ladies and lords in their refined courts listened to romantic and tragic poems known as lays about noble cursed werewolves. One of the most famous of these is the story of Bisclaveret, written by the poet Marie de France. In this tale, Bisclaveret is a respected and beloved baron in Brittany, but he has a terrible secret. For 3 days out of every week, he vanishes. His loving wife, desperate to know his secret, begs him to tell her. He finally confesses that he is a werewolf. To transform back into a man, he must hide his human clothes in a safe place and then put them back on. If his clothes are stolen while he is in wolf form, he will be trapped as a beast forever. His wife, horrified, decides to betray him. She conspires with another knight, her suitor, and tells him where her husband hides his clothes. The next time the baron goes to transform, the suitor steals the clothes, and Bisclaveret is trapped in the shape of a wolf. He is presumed dead, and his treacherous wife marries the other knight. But the wolf baron, retaining his noble human mind, does not become a savage beast. He is found by the king while hunting, and the king is so impressed by the wolf's intelligent and gentle behavior that he adopts it as a royal pet. One day, at court, the wolf sees his former wife and her new husband. In a rage, he attacks them, biting off his wife's nose. This shocking, targeted act of violence makes the king suspicious. He has the wife interrogated, and she confesses her crime. The clothes are recovered, and Bisclaveret is able to transform back into his human form, a naked and confused baron in the king's chamber. He is restored to his lands, and his disfigured, faithless wife is banished. This story shows that the werewolf was not always seen as a purely evil monster, but could also be a tragic, noble figure, a victim of a curse or a betrayal. But for you, in your small village, the werewolf is not a tragic romance. It is a terrifying threat. How does a man become such a creature? The folklore is rich with possibilities. You might be born with the curse. They say that a child conceived on a holy night like Christmas Eve, or a child who is the seventh son of a seventh son, might carry the mark of the wolf. More commonly, it is a curse laid upon you by a witch, or perhaps by a saint you have offended. But the most common explanation, the one your parish priest would give you, is that a man becomes a werewolf by making a deliberate pact with the devil. In exchange for your immortal soul, Satan grants you the power to shed your human skin and become a creature of the night. This often involved a specific ritual. You might have to go deep into the woods at night and anoint your naked body with a foul-smelling magical salve, a greasy concoction made from strange herbs, and some whispered, the rendered fat of unbaptized babies. Or you might possess a special belt woven from wolf skin. The moment you buckle this belt around your waist, the terrible transformation would begin. The stories describe this transformation as an agonizing, violent process. Your human skin would seem to bubble and split. Coarse gray fur would sprout from your pores. Your bones would crack and reshape themselves, your spine elongating, your face pushing out into a long, looping snout. Your fingernails would thicken and curve into sharp claws, and your mind would be overwhelmed by a singular savage hunger. When your village accused a man of being a werewolf and put him on trial, what were they actually seeing? This is the great mystery at the heart of the legend, and historians and psychologists still argue about the real-world phenomena that fueled this powerful belief. The simplest explanation is that, in a world that was steeped in a belief in magic, miracles, and the supernatural, people genuinely and literally believed that physical transformation was possible. If God could turn a woman into a pillar of salt, then surely the devil could turn a man into a wolf. For many people, no other explanation was necessary. A more cynical view suggests that the werewolf legend was often a convenient supernatural explanation for a very real and very human kind of monster, the serial killer or the cannibal. Imagine an outcast, a hermit living in the woods, or a person suffering from a severe mental illness who commits a series of savage murders. For the tight-knit village community, it might be easier to comprehend this horror by imagining the killer not as a depraved human being like themselves, but as a supernatural beast, a werewolf. The accusation becomes a way of projecting human evil onto a monstrous other, making it easier to understand and to combat. Modern science, looking back, can offer a range of possible medical and psychological explanations. There is a rare psychiatric delusion known as clinical lycanthropy, where a person suffers from the unshakable belief that they are a wolf. They might be found crawling on all fours, living in the woods, howling at the moon, and even attacking people, their mind completely consumed by the animal identity. It is also possible that other diseases could have been misinterpreted. A person suffering from rabies with its symptoms of aggression, foaming at the mouth, and animal-like behavior could easily have been mistaken for a werewolf. A rare genetic condition called hypertrichosis, which causes excessive hair growth all over the face and body, could also have led people to believe they were seeing a man who was part wolf. And we must not forget the fungus ergot, which we have met before. The same fungus that caused the hallucinations of St. Hugh. Anthony's fire could just as easily have caused a person to believe, with every fiber of their being, that they had transformed into a wolf, and to act accordingly. Imagine that an attack has happened in your village. A child has been killed, their body savaged. Suspicion falls upon a man named Peter, a strange, solitary man who lives on the outskirts of the forest. He is known to be ill-tempered, and he has a strange, hairy appearance. A hunting party had tracked a large wolf from the site of the attack, and had managed to wound it, cutting off one of its front paws before it escaped. The next day, Peter is found in his hut, grievously ill, his hand mysteriously missing, a wound that corresponds exactly to the paw that was severed from the wolf. For your village, this is incontrovertible proof. Peter is brought before the local court. The trial is a mixture of legal process and superstitious terror. He is accused of the crime of lycanthropy. He might be tortured, and under the agony of the rack he might confess to anything, to meeting with the devil, to rubbing the magic salve on his body, to the savage murder of the child. If he is found guilty, his punishment will be swift and terrible. He will be hanged, or perhaps even burned at the stake, a public execution designed to cleanse the community of the monstrous evil in its midst. But a werewolf was not always beyond redemption. The folklore is also filled with ways to cure the condition. In some stories, the curse is a fragile one. Simply calling the werewolf by his Christian baptismal name could be enough to shock him out of his bestial form and force him to revert to a man. In other cases, a formal exorcism performed by a priest could drive out the demonic spirit that was causing the transformations. And if the lycanthropy was caused by a magical object, like a wolf pelt belt, finding that object and destroying it, usually by burning it to ashes, would break the spell and free the man from his curse forever. You sit by the hearth in your small cottage, the door bolted securely for the night. You hear the distant howl of a wolf from the deep, dark forest that surrounds your village, and a chill runs down your spine. You find yourself wondering, is it just an animal, a simple beast of the woods, crying out to the moon? Or is it something else? Is it your neighbor, old Thomas, who lives at the edge of the village, a man whose eyes have always seemed a little too wild. Is he, at this very moment, shedding his human skin and indulging a monstrous, unspeakable hunger under the pale light of the moon? The legend of the werewolf represents one of the deepest and most primal fears of your age. It is the fear of the savage wilderness that presses in on your small, fragile island of civilization. But it is also the fear of the beast that might lurk within your neighbor, within your community, or even within yourself. It is a story about the thin, fragile, and terrifying line between humanity and the monster. This fear of a hidden monstrous identity, a secret self lurking beneath a human exterior, was a powerful one. But another great legend of your time spoke of a different kind of hidden identity, one that was not demonic, but simply human, a deception so audacious and so successful that it struck at the very heart of the most powerful institution on earth. We now leave the dark and bloody forests of the werewolf, and we travel to the hallowed sacred halls of Rome to uncover the scandalous and persistent secret of Pope Joan. The legend of the werewolf represents a deep and primal fear of the beast in the woods, but also the fear of the beast that might lurk within your neighbor, or even within yourself. It is a story about the thin, fragile line between civilization and savagery, between man and monster. This fear of a hidden, monstrous identity, a secret self lurking beneath a human exterior, was a powerful one. But another great legend of your time spoke of a different kind of hidden identity, one that was not demonic, but simply human, a deception so audacious and so successful that it struck at the very heart of the most powerful institution on earth. We now leave the dark and bloody forests of the werewolf, and we travel to the hallowed sacred halls of Rome to uncover the scandalous and persistent secret of Pope Joan. Imagine you are a pilgrim, a merchant, or a scholar in the great city of Rome in the High Middle Ages. You are surrounded by the immense, ancient, and unshakable authority of the Catholic Church. The Pope, the Bishop of Rome, the Vicar of Christ on earth, is the spiritual father to all of Christendom. His authority is absolute, his office ordained by God himself, passed down in an unbroken chain from the very first Pope, St. Peter. The sanctity and the masculinity of this sacred office are two of its most fundamental pillars. And yet, a story begins to circulate, a whisper that grows into a confident assertion, a tale so shocking that it threatens to undermine the very foundation of that authority. It is the story of a time when the chair of St. Peter was occupied not by a man, but by a woman in disguise. The story, as you hear it told, is a compelling one. It begins, most versions say, sometime in the 9th century. In England, a young woman is born. We can call her Joan. She is blessed with a brilliant, once-in-a-generation mind, a deep hunger for knowledge, and a profound intellectual curiosity. But she is also born into a world where a formal education, a life of scholarship, is utterly denied to her because of her gender. The great universities and monastery schools are open only to men. And so Joan makes a radical and dangerous decision. She decides to shed her female identity and adopt the persona of a man. With the help of a lover who is also a scholar, she cuts her hair short, binds her chest, and dresses in the simple robes of a male student. Taking the name John Anglicus, or John the English, she leaves her homeland and travels to the great centers of learning. She goes to Athens, the ancient heart of philosophy, and then to Rome, the center of the Christian world. And everywhere she goes, her genius astounds everyone she meets. As the young man John, she masters theology, philosophy, and the sciences. Her intellect is so sharp, her arguments so persuasive, and her knowledge so vast that she quickly develops a reputation as one of the most brilliant scholars in all of Europe. Her reputation reaches the ears of the highest officials in the Vatican. She is brought into the papal court the Curia, where her talents are immediately recognized. She rises with astonishing speed through the complex hierarchy of the church. She is appointed as a curial secretary, then a notary, and is eventually made a cardinal. Throughout this time, no one suspects her secret. Her piety is seen as second to none. Her wisdom is sought by the oldest and most powerful cardinals, and her administrative skills are flawless. She has completely and successfully integrated herself into the highest echelons of this exclusively male world. Then, the reigning pope, some stories say it was Leo of Dies. The cardinals of the church gather in conclave to elect his successor. They pray for guidance from the Holy Spirit as they deliberate on who is the most worthy, most holy, and most intelligent man to lead all of Christendom. And their choice, by unanimous acclaim, falls upon the brilliant and universally respected Cardinal John Anglicus. And so it happens. You, a woman from England, through a deception of breathtaking audacity, have been elected Pope. For the next 2 years, 5 months, and 4 days, as the chronicles meticulously record, you rule as Pope John VIII, and by all accounts, your papacy is a successful one. You are a wise and just administrator. You are a profound theologian. You are beloved by the clergy and the people of Rome. You have achieved the impossible, reaching the absolute pinnacle of power and spiritual authority in your world, all while maintaining your great. But even a pope is not immune to the frailties of the human heart. You have taken a lover, the only person in the world who knows your true identity, and in time, the inevitable happens. You, the pope, the vicar of Christ on earth, become pregnant. You manage to conceal your condition for months under the voluminous heavy robes of your papal office, but you cannot conceal it forever. The story of your discovery is the dramatic, humiliating, and tragic climax of the legend. The moment of truth arrives with a sense of almost cosmic irony. At the most public and solemn moment imaginable, you are leading a great holy procession through the streets of Rome. The entire city has turned out to see you. You are traveling from the great Basilica of St. Peter to the Cathedral of St. John Lateran, the Pope's official cathedral. As the Bishop of Rome, the streets are packed with cheering crowds. The air is thick with incense. And somewhere, on the narrow lane between the Colosseum and the Church of St. Clement, you are suddenly seized by violent, undeniable labor pains. You collapse to the ground. There, in the middle of the street, surrounded by your horrified retinue of cardinals, and in full view of the stunned and disbelieving populace of Rome, you, Pope John, give birth to a child. Your secret is out, revealed in the most dramatic, public, and biologically irrefutable way possible. What happens next varies depending on which version of the tale you hear. In some of the more brutal tellings, the crowd, feeling betrayed and enraged by the deception, rises up in a fury. They drag you and your newborn child through the streets and stone you both to death on the spot. In other, slightly more merciful versions, you are not killed. You are quietly deposed from the papacy, and you are allowed to live out the rest of your life in a remote convent, performing a lifetime of penance for your great sin. The story always concludes with one detail. To erase the memory of this great shame, all future papal processions would scrupulously and deliberately avoid that narrow lane where the terrible discovery was made. The geography of Rome itself was altered to bypass this site of papal humiliation. The legend grew even more bizarre over time, with the addition of another, almost certainly apocryphal detail. To ensure that such an embarrassing and fundamental error could never happen again, a new piece of furniture was supposedly introduced into the papal consecration ceremony. This was the Sella Stercoraria, which translates gruesomely as the dung chair. It was a ceremonial throne or chair, often made of marble, with a large keyhole-shaped opening in the seat. According to the legend, after a new pope was elected, he would have to sit upon this chair as part of his installation. A junior deacon would then have the unenviable task of reaching up through the hole in the seat to physically verify the new pontiff's masculinity. Once the check was complete, the deacon would reportedly shout out for all to hear, "Testiculos habet et ben pendentus," which means, "He has testicles and they hang well." The assembled clergy would then reply in unison, "Deo gratias," "Thanks be to God." It is difficult to imagine a more awkward or more public moment in any job interview in history. For centuries, from the 13th century right up until the 17th, the story of Pope Joan was widely accepted as historical fact. She appears in the official chronicles of the popes. Her story was told by respected historians and theologians. Her bust was even said to have been carved and placed alongside the other popes in the Cathedral of Siena. She was a recognized, if deeply shameful, part of the Church's history. It was only during the great religious upheavals of the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century that the story came under intense critical scrutiny. Protestant writers and polemicists gleefully seized upon the legend of the female pope as the ultimate proof of the corruption, the fallibility, and the inherent absurdity of the papacy. In response, Catholic scholars and historians began to meticulously re-examine the historical records, determined to debunk the story and prove it to be a malicious lie, and the modern historical consensus is now unanimous. Pope John almost certainly did not exist. The timeline of her supposed reign in the 9th century has no gaps. We know the names of all the popes from that period, and we know when they reigned. There is no space of 2.5 years where she could have fit. Furthermore, there are no contemporary sources for her story from the 9th or 10th centuries. The legend only appears in the chronicles some 200 or 300 years after she was supposed to have lived. She is, in all probability, a fiction. So this brings us to the great debate. If Pope Joan never existed, where did this incredibly persistent, detailed, and widely believed story come from? What were the origins of this potent and scandalous legend? One theory is that the story began as an anti-papal satire, a piece of local Roman gossip that was never meant to be taken as fact. The 10th century, for instance, was a period of immense corruption and weakness in the papacy, a time when the popes were controlled by powerful and ruthless local aristocratic families. The story of a woman on the throne could have been a satirical folk tale that expressed the people's contempt for a weak or corrupt pope. This local Roman joke then traveled, and a later, non-Roman chronicler like Martin of Opava heard the story and, not understanding its satirical intent, recorded it in his serious history of the popes as a true event. And from there the legend took on a life of its own. Another theory is that the story was invented by male clergymen as a cautionary tale, a piece of misogynistic propaganda designed to warn against the dangers of powerful women and female education. The story, with its shocking and humiliating climax, serves as the ultimate argument for why women must be kept out of the priesthood and out of the world of learning. It demonstrates, in the most graphic way possible, the chaos and shame that result when a woman transgresses her natural, God-given role. A third view is that the legend is not a complete fabrication, but a garbled and fantastical memory of a real historical situation. The story could be a symbolic representation of the so-called pornocracy, that dark period in the 10th century when the papacy was effectively controlled by a powerful Roman noblewoman named Marozia and her mother, Theodora. They installed their lovers, their sons, and their grandsons as popes. While Marozia never sat on the papal throne herself, she was the true power behind it. The legend of a woman pope could be a metaphorical way of remembering and condemning this period of female dominance over the church. Alternatively, the story could be a distorted memory of a real historical pope who was considered unusually effeminate or who was seen as being weak and controlled by a powerful female consort. You stand in the crowded, noisy streets of medieval Rome, and you hear the whispers of this incredible story. A woman on the throne of St. Peter, a pope who gave birth in the middle of a holy procession. It is a tale that perfectly combines the medieval fascination with disguise and hidden identity, with a deep-seated anxiety about the power of women and the stability of the church. While we now understand Pope Joan to be a fiction, her story was treated as a shocking and shameful historical reality for hundreds of years, a secret skeleton in the Vatican's closet. This legend explored a hidden world at the very center of Western civilization. But other great legends looked outward, to the very edges of the known world and beyond, telling of fantastical journeys across an unknown ocean to islands of fire, crystal, and even paradise itself. We now leave the political and religious intrigue of Rome, and we set sail from the coast of Ireland with a brave and holy monk on his quest for the promised land of the saints. The legend of the werewolf represents a deep and primal fear of the beast that might lurk within your neighbor, or even within yourself. It is a story about the thin, fragile line between civilization and savagery, man and monster. This fear of a hidden, monstrous identity was a powerful one. But another legend spoke of a different kind of hidden identity, one that was not demonic, but human. A deception so audacious it struck at the very heart of the most powerful institution on earth. We have left the dark forests of the werewolf and the hallowed, treacherous halls of Rome. We now find ourselves on the wild, windswept western coast of Ireland, in a small monastery overlooking the vast grey expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. And we are about to set sail on a quest for paradise itself, with a brave and holy monk. Imagine now that you are a young monk in the 6th century. Your home is a small beehive-shaped stone cell in a monastery founded by the great Abbot Brendan, a man known throughout Ireland for his piety and his incredible seafaring prowess. The Irish monks of your time are famous for their unique form of spiritual devotion, the peregrinatio pro Christo, the wandering for Christ. They believe that to truly renounce the world, one must cast oneself out onto the open ocean, leaving the destination in God's hands, seeking a solitary desert in the sea in which to pray. Your Abbot Brendan is the master of this tradition. One day, another holy man visits your monastery and tells a wondrous story. He speaks of his own voyage far out into the Atlantic to a beautiful and mysterious island known as the Promised Land of the Saints, a terrestrial paradise blessed by God. As you listen to this tale, a great spiritual longing fills your heart and the heart of your abbot. Brendan announces that he too will seek this holy island. He declares that he will build a boat and sail west, trusting in God to guide him. He chooses a small company of his most faithful monks to accompany him, and to your immense joy and terror, you are one of them. You help to build the vessel for your epic journey. It is not a great plank-built ship. It is a currach, a traditional Irish boat built in the ancient way. You construct a long, light frame of woven wicker, like a giant basket, and then you stretch stitched ox hides over it, sewing them together with leather cords. Finally, you waterproof the entire vessel by slathering it with greasy, pungent animal fat. It seems a fragile and flimsy craft to face the vast and terrifying Atlantic Ocean, but you have faith in your abbot and in your God. A wry observer might note that preparing to cross the North Atlantic in what is essentially a large, leather-covered basket requires a truly exceptional level of faith. You and your 14 chosen brethren load the currach with provisions for 40 days, and then, after a final prayer, you push off from the shore and set sail into the unknown west. Your journey, the stories say, will last for 7 years. A great circling odyssey through a sea of wonders and terrors. The tale of your voyage, known as the Navigatio Sancti Brendani Abbatis, or the Voyage of St. Brendan the Abbot, will become one of the most popular and beloved stories of the entire Middle Ages. It is a Christian odyssey, a seafaring pilgrimage through a world of marvels. Your first stop is a steep, rocky island, which you manage to land on with great difficulty. There, you are greeted by a friendly dog, and you discover an empty hall with a feast laid out, a miraculous welcome. You sail on, and you come to another island. This one covered in lush grass and populated by enormous fat sheep, each one the size of a cow. You take one for your Easter feast and sail on. As Easter Sunday approaches, you spot what appears to be a small, barren island with no grass and no trees. Desperate to celebrate the Holy Mass on solid ground after so long at sea, you and your companions land on it. You set up a small altar and you light a fire to cook your meal. And then the island begins to move. To your absolute horror, you realize that you are not on an island at all. You are on the back of a colossal, ancient sea creature, a great whale or sea turtle named Jesconius. You all scramble back into the currach in a panic, just as the great beast dips beneath the waves. Brendan calmly reassures you that this was no accident. God intended for you to celebrate Easter on the back of his oldest creature. The legend says that for the next 7 years, you will return to the back of Jesconius every single Easter to celebrate the Mass. Your journey continues. You land on another island that seems to be covered in snow, but the snow is actually a dense flock of pure white birds, so numerous they cover every tree and rock. As you watch in amazement, one of the birds flies down and begins to speak to you in a human voice. It explains that you are on the paradise of birds. These are not normal birds, it tells you. They are fallen angels. In the great war in heaven between God and Lucifer, they were the angels who remained neutral, who did not fight for either side. As their punishment, they are not condemned to the fires of hell, but they are also not permitted back into heaven. Instead, they are doomed to wander the world in the form of these white birds until the day of judgment. And the beautiful bird song you hear is their constant, sorrowful song of praise to God. You sail on, your voyage now following a set, liturgical rhythm, returning to certain islands each year for specific feasts. You encounter an island that is home to a community of 24 ancient monks, led by the Abbot Aelbo, who have lived there in perfect silence and piety for 80 years, their food miraculously provided for them each day by a friendly otter who brings them fish from the sea. But not all of your encounters are so peaceful. One day, you approach a dark, smoky island, and you are attacked. The inhabitants, a race of strong men or smiths, begin to hurl great, glowing lumps of flaming, foul-smelling slag at your boat from the roaring forges on their shore. You flee in terror from this island, which many have interpreted as a literal vision of hell, or perhaps a more rational explanation, a volcanic island like Iceland with its geysers and lava flows. The wonders become more and more surreal. You sail through a part of the ocean that is eerily calm and as perfectly clear as glass, allowing you to see all the strange creatures living on the seabed below. You come across a massive shimmering column of pure crystal, floating in the sea, so tall you cannot see its top. It is draped with a strange silvery canopy, which your abbot tells you is made from the fabric of the heavens. You witness a terrifying battle in the sky between a griffin and another strange winged creature. You are attacked by a ravenous sea monster with great tusks, only to be saved at the last moment when another, even larger sea monster, sent by God, arrives and tears your attacker to pieces. In one of the most bizarre and strangely poignant episodes of your entire journey, you come across a lonely, desolate rock in the middle of the empty ocean. And sitting on this rock is a single, miserable, naked man, his body lashed by the waves and the wind. Your abbot asks him who he is, and the man replies with the most shocking answer imaginable. He is Judas Iscariot, the apostle who betrayed Jesus. He explains that while his eternal punishment is to be boiled in the fires of hell, God, in his infinite mercy, grants him a temporary respite on this lonely rock every Sunday and on holy days. The demons who torment him cannot touch him here. This strange, sad, and deeply compassionate vision of Judas having a day off from hell is a testament to the unique and sometimes unorthodox imagination of the early Irish church. Finally, after 7 long years of these strange allegorical trials and wonders, you sail through a great, thick bank of fog that separates the known world from the world of myth. And on the other side you have arrived. Before you lies the promised land of the saints. It is a vast island, bathed in a perpetual gentle light, for there is no night here. The air is warm, the trees are heavy with delicious otherworldly fruit, and a great river runs through the center of the land. You and your brothers explore this paradise for 40 days, your hearts filled with a profound peace. At last, a shining angel appears to you. He tells you that God has allowed you to see this blessed land, but that you cannot stay. Your mission is to return to Ireland and to tell the world of the wonders you have seen as a testament to God's power and to the reality of the paradise that awaits the faithful. And so you sail home. But what are we in our modern world to make of this incredible story? Is the voyage of St. Brendan a purely fictional, symbolic, and religious allegory about the journey of the human soul? Or could this fantastical tale contain a distorted, half-remembered kernel of historical truth? A garbled memory of real sea voyages undertaken by Irish monks far out into the unknown Atlantic? This is a debate that has fascinated historians, archaeologists, and adventurers for centuries. The most widely accepted scholarly view is that the Navigatio is a masterpiece of Christian allegory. It belongs to a genre of fantastical Irish literature known as an imram, a wonder voyage. In this interpretation, the voyage is not a real geographical journey, but a spiritual one. The 7 years represent the pilgrimage of a human life through the trials and temptations of the world. Each island is a symbolic stop. Each monster a representation of a sin to be overcome. Each helpful animal a sign of God's ever-present grace. The promised land of the saints is not a real island. It is heaven itself. The story is a beautiful and complex piece of theological fiction designed to inspire faith and to teach the lessons of the Christian life. However, there is another, more romantic and controversial theory. This theory holds that the story could be a fantastical retelling of real voyages of exploration. We know that Irish monks of this period were among the most skilled and daring seafarers in the world, and we know that their unique form of asceticism, the peregrinatio, drove them to seek out isolated hermitages on the most remote islands they could find. We have historical evidence that they reached the Shetland Islands, the Faroe Islands, and even Iceland long before the Vikings arrived. Could they have gone even further? Proponents of this theory, most famously the explorer Tim Severin, who in the 1970s built a replica leather currach and successfully sailed it from Ireland to Newfoundland, argue that the fantastical descriptions in the Navigatio could be garbled interpretations of real places and natural phenomena. The island of giant sheep could be the Faroe Islands, which are still famous for their large, robust sheep. The fiery island of the Smiths could be a description of the volcanic eruptions in Iceland. The Great Crystal Column could be a close encounter with a massive iceberg. The sea as clear as glass could be the calm, frigid waters of the Labrador Current. From this perspective, St. Brendan and his monks were the true European discoverers of North America, centuries before the Vikings and 1,000 years before Columbus. The Navigatio, in this view, is a true story. Filtered through the lens of a deeply religious and mythological worldview, you finally step ashore back on the green coast of Ireland. Your body weary from 7 years of travel, but your soul filled with the profound and unshakable wonder of what you have seen. Your incredible story of the Great Whale Island, the talking birds of paradise, and the crystal column floating in the sea will be written down by your fellow monks. It will become a medieval bestseller, a story beloved across all of Christendom, a testament to the adventurous spirit of your people and to the deep-seated medieval belief in a world that was charged with magic, meaning, and divine mystery. Your voyage looked west to the very edge of the world map and into the Sea of Paradise. But another set of hugely popular legends looked in the opposite direction, to the east, cataloging the equally strange and wonderful marvels of a land of infinite possibility. We must now turn from the verifiable travels of a saint to the completely untrustworthy, but even more influential, travels of a fictional knight named Sir John Mandeville. Your journey to the promised land of the saints was a testament to the adventurous spirit of your age, a story that perfectly captured the medieval belief in a world filled with both divine and demonic marvels, a world where the line between the natural and the supernatural was porous and magical. St. Brendan's voyage looked west, across the unknown ocean to the very edge of the world, in search of a terrestrial paradise. But another, even more popular and influential, travelogue looked in the opposite direction. It took its readers on a journey not of pure faith, but of worldly curiosity, east past the Holy Land and into the lands of the Great Khan, the empire of Prester John, and the islands of utter fantasy. We must now turn from the verifiable, if embellished, travels of a real saint to the completely untrustworthy, but far more detailed, travels of a fictional English knight named Sir John Mandeville. Imagine you are a person of some learning in the late 14th century. A new book has begun to circulate, and it is the sensation of the age. It is called The Travels of Sir John Mandeville. It is a first-hand account, written in a plain, honest, and believable style, by an English knight who claims to have left his home in St. Albans in the year 1322, and to have spent the next 34 years traveling through all the strange and wonderful lands of the East. The book is an instant bestseller. It is copied and translated into every major European language, from English and French to German, Latin, and even Irish. For the next several centuries, it will be treated by most of its readers, including Christopher Columbus himself, as a completely factual and authoritative guide to the geography, the peoples, and the wonders of the world. A modern reader might think of it as the medieval equivalent of the Lonely Planet Guide, but for a world filled with places that do not, have never existed. You open the book and begin your journey alongside Sir John. The first part of his narrative is designed to build your trust. It is a relatively sober, practical guide for a pilgrim traveling to the Holy Land. He describes the various routes one can take to Constantinople, the great capital of the Byzantine Empire. He gives you a tour of its holy relics. He then guides you through Cyprus, Rhodes, and down the coast to Egypt, describing the court of the Sultan, the Great Pyramids, and the methods for hatching crocodile eggs. He leads you into the Holy Land itself, giving you a detailed tour of Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and all the sacred sites associated with the life of Christ. This first section is filled with plausible, if not always accurate, details. It establishes the author, Sir John, as a pious and trustworthy Christian knight, a reliable guide for the wonders that are to come. And then, having guided you through the known world of the pilgrimage routes, Mandeville takes you by the hand and leads you east, beyond the borders of Christendom, into the vast, mysterious lands of wonder and fable. And the further you travel from your own home, the stranger, the more marvelous, and the more monstrous the world becomes. You travel through the lands of the great Tatar Khans. You visit the court of Prester John himself, and Mandeville, with his eyewitness's authority, confirms many of the wonders you first read about in the famous forged letter. He tells you that he even served for a time in Prester John's army, fighting against his enemies. This confirmation from a supposedly real English knight gives the older legend a powerful new lease on life. From there, your journey becomes a tour of a world of pure fantasy. You visit an island where the people are born old and grey, and they grow younger each year until they are infants, and then they die in their infancy. You pass through the terrifying Valley Perilous, a place filled with devils, illusions, and strange, deafening noises. A place no man can pass through without being a good and devout Christian. You come to the gravelly sea, a vast waterless sea made entirely of sand and gravel, which ebbs and flows in great waves, just like a real ocean. But the most unforgettable parts of your journey are your encounters with the so-called monstrous races, the strange and wonderful forms of humanity that are believed to live at the very edges of the world. Mandeville did not invent these creatures. He borrowed them from ancient Greek and Roman writers like Herodotus and Pliny the Elder, but he presented them to you as real, living peoples he had met on his travels. In the hot lands of Ethiopia, you encounter a race of men known as the Cyapods. These people have only one leg, but their single foot is of an enormous size. During the heat of the midday sun, a cyapod will lie on his back, lift his great foot into the air, and use it as a giant parasol to shade his entire body. It is a wonderfully practical, if slightly absurd, solution to the problem of the tropical sun. You travel to another island and you meet the Blemier. These are a race of headless men. They have no head and no neck, but their face, their eyes, their nose, and their mouth is located right in the center of their chest. Mandeville reports that they are a fierce and warlike people. In another land, you encounter the Cynocephali, the dog-headed men. This is an entire nation of people who have the bodies of men, but the heads of dogs. They cannot speak like men, but they bark. And though they seem monstrous, Mandeville assures you that they are a rational people who live in an organized society, and that their king is a great and powerful lord. The catalogue of wonders continues. You meet the Panati, a people whose ears are so long and so large that when they go to sleep at night, they do not need a blanket. They simply wrap themselves up in their own enormous ears. You find islands inhabited by giants who are 50 feet tall, and other islands inhabited by pygmies who live on nothing but the smell of wild apples. You encounter races of hermaphrodites, and men whose lips are so large that they can hold them up to shield their faces from the sun. Your journey with Mandeville is a journey through every strange story and rumor about the peoples of the world that a medieval European has ever heard. But who was the man who brought you on this incredible journey? Who was this Sir John Mandeville? He presents himself to you as a simple English knight, a real man who saw these things with his own eyes. But modern scholarship has revealed, without any doubt, that this is a fiction. The author of the Travels of Sir John Mandeville almost certainly never traveled to most of the places he describes. The book is a brilliant and seamless work of compilation, a literary collage. The author was a man with access to a very good library, and he skillfully stitched his book together from dozens of other sources. His descriptions of the Holy Land were borrowed from the real travelogues of other pilgrims. His accounts of the Mongol court were taken from the writings of Franciscan friars who had actually traveled there, and his descriptions of the monstrous races were lifted directly from the classical encyclopedias of ancient Rome. He was not a traveler. He was a compiler, an editor, a meditator, a medieval aggregator of content. So if the travels are a fiction, what about the traveller himself? Was there ever a real Sir John Mandeville from St. Albans? This is a great literary mystery that historians still argue about. Was the name a complete invention, a pseudonym for an author who wanted to remain anonymous? Or was there a real knight by that name whose identity was borrowed by the author to give his work an air of authenticity? Several theories have been proposed. A Belgian chronicler from the period claimed that the true author was a French physician from the city of Liège, a man named Jean de Bourgogne, who had confessed this to him on his deathbed. Other scholars have suggested that the author may have been a Benedictine monk from the Abbey of St. Albans, the very place Mandeville claimed as his home, who would have had access to the great library needed to compile such a work. The consensus today is that the author was almost certainly not an English knight, but was more likely a learned man from the continent, probably French or Flemish, and that Sieur John Mandeville was a carefully constructed, fictional persona. He was a character in his own book. So why was this work of fiction, this great literary hoax, one of the most popular and influential books of its time? What made it so appealing to you and your contemporaries? First, it was comprehensive. It gathered all the wonders of the known and unknown world into one single, accessible, and highly entertaining volume. It was a one-stop shop for marvels. Second, it was presented as fact. The author's persona as a straightforward, honest, and slightly world-weary knight made his fantastical stories seem credible and authentic. He tells you these things not with a wink, but with the serious, deadpan expression of a man reporting what he has seen. And finally, the book had an attitude that was surprisingly tolerant for its time. While Mandeville presents himself as a devout and unwavering Christian, he often describes the other cultures and religions he encounters with a genuine sense of curiosity, and sometimes even respect. He describes the Saracens not as evil heathens, but as a noble people who simply have a different law. He even finds things to admire in their society. In an age of crusade and religious warfare, this relatively open-minded perspective was unusual, and it may have contributed to the book's broad appeal. You finally close the covers of the Travels of Sir John Mandeville, your head swimming with vivid, unforgettable images. You have seen dog-headed men and headless giants. You have sailed on a sea made of sand and have visited a fountain that can make you young again. For you, this book is not a work of fiction. It is a window, a portal into the true, vast, bizarre, and deeply strange world that God has created. A world that exists just beyond the borders of your own small corner of Christendom. The legend of Mandeville's travels defined the European understanding of the wider world for centuries, filling in the blank spaces on the map with a vibrant and terrifying menagerie of marvels. These legends of distant, magical places were a way of grappling with the great unknown of the world outside. But the most enduring and powerful legends were often those that were closest to home. The stories that were woven into the very fabric of a nation's identity, the stories of its own mythical past and its own deeply held hope for a future savior. We must now leave the fantastical lands of the East and travel to the misty, rain-swept shores of the British Isles, to the enchanted, otherworldly island of Avalon, where a great king is not dead, but merely sleeping, waiting for the moment of his country's greatest need to rise again. Your journey with Mandeville has shown you a world of wonders, a catalogue of the bizarre and monstrous peoples that were believed to inhabit the far corners of the earth. His travelogue looked east, to the lands of fable and ancient empires. But the most enduring and powerful legends of your age were often those that were closest to home, the stories that were woven into the very fabric of a nation's identity, the stories of its own mythical past and its own deeply held hope for a future savior. We must now leave the fantastical lands of the East and travel to the misty, rain-swept shores of the British Isles, to the enchanted, otherworldly island of Avalon, where a great king is not dead, but merely sleeping, waiting for the moment of his country's greatest need to rise again. Our story begins at the very end of another. We must return for a moment to the court of King Arthur. The glorious fellowship of the Round Table, which you joined on the quest for the Holy Grail, is now broken. That quest, while a spiritual triumph for a chosen few, shattered the worldly perfection of Camelot. The best knights are dead, lost in the enchanted forests. And the great sin at the heart of the court, the adulterous love between your greatest champion, Sir Lancelot, and your queen, Guinevere, has finally been brought into the light. The kingdom is torn apart by jealousy, betrayal, and civil war. This internal conflict provides an opportunity for Arthur's treacherous nephew, in some versions, his illegitimate son Mordred. While Arthur is away, fighting Lancelot in France, Mordred seizes the throne of Britain. You must now return with your king to fight one last, desperate and tragic battle on your own soil. The final battle takes place at Camlan, a field in the west of Britain. It is a terrible and bloody affair. The dream of the Round Table is extinguished in a wave of fratricidal slaughter. You see Mordred still standing, and with a great cry you charge him one last time. You thrust your spear through his body, but as he dies, Mordred pulls himself up the length of the spear and deals you a single mortal wound to the head with his own sword. You have defeated the traitor, but you too are dying. The battlefield falls silent, littered with the bodies of your best and most loyal knights. You are carried from the field by one of the few survivors, your faithful knight Sir Bedivere. As you lie dying on the shore of a misty lake, you know you have one final task to perform. You command Bedivere to take your legendary sword, Excalibur, and throw it into the water. Twice Bedivere hesitates, unable to bring himself to throw away such a beautiful and precious object. He hides the sword and returns to you, lying about what he has done. But you, his king, know he is deceiving you. Finally, on the third command, Bedivere hurls the great sword out into the lake, and a miracle occurs. A woman's arm, clad in white samite, rises from the surface of the water, catches the sword by the hilt, brandishes it 3 times, and then draws it beneath the waves forever. Your final task is complete. As Bedivere carries you back to the water's edge, a mysterious black barge appears out of the mist. The barge is filled with beautiful black-hooded queens, weeping and lamenting. Among them, the stories say, is your own enigmatic half-sister, the powerful sorceress Morgan Le Fay. They gently lift your wounded body and place you upon the barge. The distraught Sir Bedivere cries out, asking where they are taking you, his lord. And with your last breath, you give him your final cryptic and hopeful answer. I go now to the Isle of Avalon to be healed of my grievous wound. The barge slowly sails away into the mist, vanishing from the world of men. This is the crucial moment. You are not dead. Your story does not end on the bloody field of Camlan. You have been taken to a magical, otherworldly island, a place that is not quite in this world and not quite in the next, where the apples grow on their own and the people live for hundreds of years. And there, in a deep, enchanted sleep, the great sorceresses of Avalon are tending to your wounds, healing you. And the great prophecy, the hope that will sustain the Celtic peoples of Britain for centuries, is that you are not gone forever. You are the Rex Quandam. Rex Quandam. Rex. You are merely resting, and one day, when your country is in its darkest hour and its greatest need, you, King Arthur, will return in all your glory to lead your people to once. This legend, first popularized and spread by the writer Geoffrey of Monmouth in his hugely influential History of the Kings of Britain in the 1130s, became one of the most powerful and persistent political myths in all of European history. For the conquered Celtic peoples of Britain, the Welsh, the Cornish, and the Breton cit was a symbol of their enduring national identity and a potent expression of their hope for liberation from their new Anglo-Norman rulers. Arthur was their king, and his promised return was a promise that they would one day throw off the yoke of their conquerors. This hope was so powerful and so widespread that it became a genuine political problem for the English kings. A belief in a returning hero who will save his people is a very dangerous idea for the ruling class. And so, in the late 12th century, the authorities decided they had to put an end to this myth once and for all. They had to prove definitively that Arthur was dead. And so, in the year 1091, the monks of Glastonbury Abbey in Somerset made a stunning and incredibly convenient announcement. They claimed to have discovered the tomb of the legendary King Arthur and his wife, Queen Guinevere, buried in their own abbey cemetery. The monks, led by their abbot, began a great public excavation. The contemporary chroniclers describe how they dug deep into the earth, and at a depth of 7 feet, they found a large stone slab. Beneath that, at a depth of 16 feet, they found a massive coffin, fashioned from a single hollowed-out log, and inside, they found the skeletons of 2 people. One, a man of immense size, his skull showing signs of a terrible head wound, and the other, a smaller skeleton of a woman, with a lock of golden hair still intact. Most importantly of all, they claimed to have found a lead cross buried with the coffin, and on this cross an inscription was written in archaic Latin letters which read, Hic iaset sepultus inclitus rex Arturius in insula Avalonia. Here lies buried the famous King Arthur on the Isle of Avalon. Here was the proof. Not only was Arthur dead, but Glastonbury Abbey, which was once surrounded by watery marshes and was known as the Isle of Glass, was the true historical Avalon. It was a brilliant piece of propaganda, and almost certainly a complete and cynical hoax. The monks of Glastonbury had a very powerful motive. Their abbey had recently been destroyed in a devastating fire, and they were desperate to raise the enormous funds needed to rebuild it. What better way to do that than to suddenly discover that they were the keepers of the tomb of the most famous king in all of Christendom? The discovery would turn their abbey into a major pilgrimage site, a national shrine, bringing in a constant stream of wealthy pilgrims and their donations. It was the most successful fundraising campaign in monastic history. The discovery also perfectly served the political interests of the English king Henry II. By proving that Arthur was dead and buried, he could quash the rebellious hopes of the Welsh, demonstrating that their mythical savior was never coming back. The entire affair was a masterstroke of political and financial opportunism, a pious fraud designed to kill a legend. But the legend was too powerful to be killed by a few old bones and a conveniently inscribed lead cross. And it raises the final and deepest mystery of all. Who was this king, whose myth was so potent that popes would discuss it and kings would orchestrate archaeological hoaxes to debunk it? Was there ever a real historical Arthur at all? This is the foundational question of the entire Arthurian tradition, a debate that has raged for centuries and continues to fascinate historians today. The argument for a real historical Arthur is based on a few tantalizingly brief mentions in early pre-Geoffrey of Monmouth texts. A Welsh monk named Nennius, writing a history in the early 9th century, lists 12 great battles that were fought and won by a heroic British war leader named Arthur against the invading Anglo-Saxons. Another document, the Annales Cambriae or Welsh Annals, compiled in the 10th century, also mentions the name Arthur in connection with 2 battles. The historical theory, therefore, is that there was a real man at the heart of the legend. He was not a great, chivalrous king in a shining castle. He was a Romano-British Dux Bellorum, a leader of battles, a gritty post-Roman warlord who lived in the late 5th or early 6th century, and he led a temporarily successful, heroic, but ultimately doomed, resistance against the pagan Saxon invaders in the chaotic period after the Roman legions had abandoned Britain. The other school of thought, however, argues that there is no solid contemporary evidence for Arthur's existence at all. The sources that mention him were all written 300 or 400 years after he was supposed to have lived. They argue that he is a purely literary and mythological figure. The name Arthur might be a composite, a legendary hero to whom the deeds of many different, real British warlords were attached over the centuries. Or he could have even deeper, more ancient roots. Some scholars suggest that he might be a historicized version of a forgotten Celtic bear god. The name Arthur is very close to the Welsh word arth, which means bear. And the bear was a powerful symbol of strength and kingship in Celtic mythology. It is possible that an ancient god was transformed over the centuries by storytellers into a human king. Whatever his true origins, it was the 12th century writer, Geoffrey of Monmouth, who took the vague shadowy figure of Arthur the Warlord, and in his wildly popular History of the Kings of Britain, transformed him into the great, chivalrous, and magnificent king that we know today. He invented the whole framework of the legend: the sword in the stone, the wizard Merlin, the noble knights, the traitorous Mordred, and the final mysterious journey to Avalon. And why has this legend, unlike that of Prester John or the monsters of Mandeville, endured with such incredible power into our modern world? Perhaps it is because it speaks to a deep and universal human longing for a lost golden age, a time of justice, honor, and noble purpose. And even more powerfully, it contains the archetypal myth of the returning hero, the sleeping king who will one day come again to save his people in their darkest hour. It is a story that refuses to end. It is a promise that the best and noblest parts of our past are not truly dead and gone, but are merely resting, waiting for the right moment to return. You stand now on a misty green hill in the English countryside, perhaps the ruins of Glastonbury Abbey. You look out over the landscape, and you can almost feel the weight of the legend in the very air around you. Is this really the Isle of Avalon? Is the great king truly dead and buried beneath your feet? His story ended by a clever monastic fraud? Or is he still out there, somewhere beyond the veil of this world, sleeping in an enchanted orchard, his terrible wound finally healed, waiting for the call? The legend of the once and future king is the final and most powerful mystery of the medieval imagination. It is a story not just of faith or of geography, but of national identity, of cultural memory, and of the profound, enduring power of hope. And it is a fitting place for us to end our long journey through the strange, wonderful, and mysterious stories of a bygone age. And here, on the misty, mythical Isle of Avalon, with the promise of a sleeping king still hanging in the air, our journey through the mysterious legends of the medieval world finally comes to its end. We have searched for lost kingdoms in the east and sailed to paradise islands in the west. We have witnessed the tragedy of a town without children and a man without death. We have shivered at tales of werewolves and marveled at the audacity of a female pope. The great, colorful, and sometimes frightening storybook of the medieval imagination can now be gently closed. Let the vivid images of these legends begin to soften and fade. The gleaming gold of Prester John's kingdom, the shimmering light of the Holy Grail, the gluttonous dreamscape of Cockaigne, let them all dissolve like mist in the morning sun. They belong to a world that saw magic in every shadow and meaning in every star. It was a world where the line between the possible and the impossible was a gentle suggestion, not a hard boundary. But your world is different. And as the legends recede, you can allow yourself to settle back into the quiet comfort of your own reality. You are lying in your bed in a room that is safe and familiar. The map of your world is complete. There are no blank spaces marked, "Here be dragons." The strange and monstrous races described by Mandeville have all been revealed to be just other people in other lands. The great mysteries have been solved. The world for you has been measured, charted, and explained. There's a great comfort and a great safety in this certainty. The fears that gave birth to the werewolf and the hopes that gave birth to the returning king are the fears and hopes of a distant past. They are not yours. Feel the peace of this knowledge. feel the quiet of your own room. A quiet that is not filled with the enchanting, dangerous music of a piper, but with the simple, gentle sounds of your own time. The great age of legends is over. But the power of stories, the human need to dream, to hope, and to find meaning in the darkness. That is a thing that never ends. As you lie here now, let your own mind drift away from the grand legends of history and into the small, personal, and mysterious legends of your own dream. Let your thoughts become as soft and as indistinct as the mists that hide the shores of Avalon. The quest is over. The journey is done. All that is left is to rest. The world is quiet now. The stories are all told. Let the silence be a soft blanket. Let the darkness be a gentle friend. And let yourself drift into the deep and peaceful and well-earned sleep that awaits you.